Mix it up.
So this isn't my first rodeo, and this is actually my second episode analysis, the first being Crystal Empire Part 1, but that really bored me, so I didn't really go through that. Here, though, I'll take another jab at it, just to see what happens, but, don't expect too much. It is my second time. Sweetie Belle's jab at Apple Bloom was a small nod to Philly Vanilli, I thought. Perhaps the writer is recognizing that Pinky was too forward in that episode. It was enjoyable for me, at least. This brings up a minor topic I want to clarify. The writers shouldn't really even be addressed as such, as each writer obviously has their own spin on things, but to refer to this amalgamous group as a single unit is a vast oversight. We must remember that the writers do disagree and that they are the god in their own work, freely ignoring inputs and small writing consistencies unless dictated to by the creative director, McCarthy, and she has no time to look at writing under a scope of this magnitude, so these types of character inconsistencies will often, if not always, turn up. Moving on, doesn't anyone remember the excitement of staying home alone for the first time? Why is it that I'm the only one that has this nostalgia, the first time your parents, out of necessity or otherwise, recognize your development and maturity to take care of yourself, your friends, and your many responsibilities? I feel that many of us would have reacted much like Apple Bloom in that situation, overjoyed at our newfound freedom. But what is striking, at least to me, is the degree to which AJ is motherly in this episode. It's an obvious extreme, but that maternal instinct is very contrary to a sisterly one, as seen in Frozen, if any of you have seen that. I would almost say, despite the amount of publicity it's gotten, the whole Let It Go fiasco. Yeah, let the song go, but look at Frozen more deeply as a narrative. There's so much more there than Idina Menzel's voice, although Menzel's voice is admittedly heavenly. I must then consider the angle that this episode was written to target mothers who are watching the show with their children. If in fact it is, then the rest of the episode would make a great deal more sense, and would frankly be more interesting to talk about, so I'll use that lens to view subtext from this point onward. Another minor note. Apple Bloom is boring. I don't mean that she's a boring character, although she is, I think. But honestly, did you think us so juvenile, Hasbro, as to believe that the only thing children do when they're left to their own vices is reading a book or listening to music? Good God, what an oversight. But this can be interpreted differently. I don't know how many of you know, but this was a close parallel to the EPA Inspector John Beale, whose recent scandal and fiasco shook popular news media by storm. If you're unsure of what I'm talking about, go watch The Daily Show sometime. It's quite funny. I'm sure most of you have drawn the relationship between Applejack and Apple Bloom and Sisterhood Social into question here, but to me it seems fairly consistent with what the writer is saying with respect to the maternal lens I've said before I analyzed this episode in. If there are a conflict in Applejack's and Apple Bloom's past relating to their status as parentless children, and the subtext here is truly referring to that, then by God, Applejack has some development yet. Applejack's gross over-exaggeration of her motherly tendencies must have had a catalyst, and perhaps she is overwhelmed by an irrational guilt from the departure of her parents, whether it be intentional, accidental, or fated. Applejack says that she let Apple Bloom down once, and in the context of this episode she may have been referring to the fact that she had forgotten to put a few items on the list, or that she left in the first place, but this seems egregiously light to mention as slights in Applejack's good name. No, I believe that Applejack refers to an indescript event wherein Applejack fails Apple Bloom at both the maternal and sisterhood level. But again, this is in the lens of the maternal, so take this with that bag of salt. We then go on to part 2 of the episode, in which Apple Bloom takes it upon herself to go deliver the pies. She does this by climbing down the mountain of Deus Ex Machina by her bedroom window. I'm sorry, I have to take a moment here to explain Deus Ex Machina. There seems to be a terrible misconception in the internet about this machine of God, as is a literal translation from Latin. The phrase has taken on this negative connotation in almost a denotative sense. Very close. Nowadays, writers are encouraged not to use it, but in classical literature it was as much of a trope as Chekhov's gun, which is another thing altogether that is misconstrued, but let's get back to the Latin here. Deus Ex Machina originally referred to the device which allowed actors in olden times to gain altitude and fly above the stage, hence, machine of God. It has then been adapted as a literary tool, and it's just that, a literary tool, to be used at the writer's discretion. Its existence is not something that should be condemned simply by the supposed fault of its existence. Back to the episode. I think this episode should be viewed in 2 parts, one with Apple Bloom failing at her home to be responsible, and her seemingly unlimited resourcefulness outside of her home. Note that for all Applejack's fretting, she doesn't seem to care about the mess that Apple Bloom is making, and simply is caring for her safety. We see no reason Apple Bloom is in danger at the farm, and in fact she is far more irresponsible there than out on the open road. But in part 2, when she actually is in real danger, we see the contrasting forces of this dynamic fully come into view. Apple Bloom displays all of the traits necessary to being a mature individual here instead of at home when it's really needed. Applejack is then impressed, but I felt that this part could have been a little better. If Apple Bloom could have conquered her trial by herself, that would have sent a great message to all those mothers out there, and said that children are not as helpless as they seem, but instead Applejack comes to save the day, and that message kind of falls on its face. Closing remarks. What is it with the Chimera, anyway? Is it retarded? It must have seen Apple family members before. Applejack knows what to pack for it. It's easily distracted by itself, and is a terrible antagonist. Why doesn't Applejack send the pies by airmail? We know that there's some Pegasi that deliver mail by air. Wouldn't that be safer for both the ponies and the pies? F***ing redneck horses. What was the lesson here? There's no diary entry here to spell it out for the young, so it must have been obvious, but I didn't see it. Perhaps I see less than the common 8-year-old child? I don't know. Anyway, tell me what you thought about the episode in the comments below.